Hello! We are officially live for Selling in a Small Town Farmers Market. I am a little bit early just so that way I can be here to meet you all. So I'll just wait. So for those who are tuning in, if you want to just drop in the comments below where you're from, I would love to see kind of where everybody's joining me from tonight. And I see we have a couple more people who just joined. If you are just joining us, feel free to drop a comment of where you're tuning in from. I'm kind of going to wait until like 5 after to start, just so that way folks can tune in and not feel like they're missing anything. Thank you. I call it the blue house because as soon as we moved in, I have been painting most of the rooms blue. But now I'm kind of on a green kick, so that's a tangent, but hi from New Orleans. Oh, Krista, you're from my hometown. I grew up in St. Louis. Oh, and a fellow Minnesotan. Illinois. Like I said when I started the live, I started it a little bit early so that way people can trickle in, and I'm probably going to wait until like 6:05 before I really start talking farmers markets, just so that way people can tune in and feel like they're not missing anything. But we can also catch them up. I am now in Minnesota. So I'm coming to you live from my home in Glendon, Minnesota, which is outside of Fargo, North Dakota. So you're not too far from me, Lindsay. Just a couple hours. Also in the Midwest, when you say like, oh, you're close to me, you can be like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 hours away from a person. So for those who aren't Midwesterners, you're probably like, 2 hours? That's so far. Well, we'll give it one more minute and then I'll start talking farmers markets. So I'm gonna try this poll thing here and I'm gonna type out a question. Okay, so I hope the poll, like, I just created it. I don't know where that's gonna go here. Oh, here, not published. Activate it. Okay, so I kind of want to get like a sense of, do you currently participate in a farmer's market? Yes, no, or you want to, and that's why you're here. I would love to kind of get a sense of where everybody's knowledge is at with everything farmers markets. I'm going to show the results too in the video. So far we're about like 50-50. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up my note. I wrote out notes because I will admit I'm a little bit of a tangent person, so I may get off on a story, and my notes are gonna help me keep it relevant. So if I'm like looking over here, that's what I'm looking at. But basically, I went through kind of the things that we talked or said that you would learn from watching the video, and I kind of broke it down by that. So, introduction to farmers markets. I feel like most people know what a farmers market is. I would say that like the traditional model is kind of a weekly thing. It depends on which area you're from. So, of course, like up here in the Northland, where I am, markets usually run from like the beginning of June to about October. Otherwise, they're snowed out. I have seen like an increase in seasonal markets, and they'll host these in local places indoors, where different vendors can come. But kind of, I think what people think of when they think farmers market, they think of the traditional weekly market. So how I kind of want to, what I was thinking before the presentation of like, if I could have like you guys walk away with one thing, especially for those who are thinking about doing markets, I want you to think about, is this the right fit for me? So that's what I have had to learn and kind of work with as I've entered into the world of farmers markets. So the weekly market, for example, is a lot of work, and it's a really fast turnaround. So if you are selling on a Saturday, for example, and the next market is on Saturday, chances are like you're going to be spending Sunday cleaning your kitchen and like, you know, bringing stuff inside or trying to sell what you didn't sell at the farmer's market. And then you're going to begin your prep all over again on Monday, and you're going to start working on Monday. So with that being said, it's a lot of work if you want to do weekly markets. I can't tell you if it's worth it or not. Like, that's something that you have to decide in your own schedule. So I work full time. So the market that I do actually is a monthly market. And so I've been seeing some new models, especially around our area emerging, where they know that there are weekly, like there's weekly markets, but then there's also monthly markets. And kind of those seasonal ones that I talked about too. So sometimes they'll run like a spring market or a fall market or a winter market. And those are much easier to manage or to apply to become a vendor at because they're one-time events. For me, the monthly has been perfect. Since I work full-time, like I said, it gives me a lot of time to menu plan, figure out what went right, what didn't go right, and kind of everything in between, which helps, set me up for success the next time. The last year they actually did weekly, and they did it like in the fall. It was like 3 or 4 consecutive weeks in a row. And that was, like I said, a lot of work, really fast turnaround. But surprisingly, it didn't really affect how much I made per market at all. So just something to consider. Yeah. I think that's Nanette said hers is on Sunday. Monday she takes as a down day, and then Tuesday started all over again. Yep, exactly. So that's something to consider if you're looking on getting into the market circuit. If you want to do weekly, is that something that works in your schedule? If you do find markets who do monthly, they exist. Some things to consider is booth payments. So sometimes they'll have like a one-time down payment. It depends on the popularity of the market, if it's refundable or non-refundable. Sometimes they'll do like a percentage of refundable, a percentage of non-refundable. Someone just posted, if you aren't in the That's a Sweet booth group on Facebook, I highly recommend. Someone recently just posted about how markets in their areas ask for a percentage of their profits. So apparently that's a thing. Up here, it's more of that down payment model. So my market, you do a one-time down payment, and then you get that down payment back if you attend all of the markets, which is super nice. Not every market is like that. So just something to consider. I don't know if I would do it for a percent of profits. It kind of depends on what percent we're talking about. But that's just me personally. I think you'd have to kind of look at it from your own business model and decide what's going to work for you. Traditionally, I think people think produce when it comes to farmers markets, but things are really evolving, especially in our area, to involve more local artisans and craft-like products. And that's kind of where we get into like analyzing a farmer's market. So what are your area demographics? So in my area, I live on the outskirts of the metro area of Fargo-Moorhead. Fargo-Moorhead has a large market, right? So it's huge. They have like 7 bakers at this market. Now, I live on the east side of town, but the town that I sell in is actually northwest of our metro area. So I drive 40 minutes to get to my market. But I feel like it's worth it because my mileage is, I can write it off. I can also write off any gas or meals that we eat while we're at the market. I would say always check in with your accountant if you have an accountant, or like do some research into it if you are trying to figure out what you can and what you can't deduct. So for me, it benefited me to drive to this market outside of my metro area, and I actually got connected with the market through a friend. And I don't know if Miranda is watching, but Miranda is actually, she actually lives in the area of this small town. And she has a fabulous business built on from her local folks and also folks from the metro area as well. But that's kind of how I got involved in my market and how I made the decision to drive. So for those of you watching or who are here, and you may not be in a small town, maybe you are, but maybe you're in a metro area and it makes sense for you to drive to or travel to a smaller market. It's something to consider, especially if there aren't a lot of people doing like sugar cookies or other types of baked goods. Something also to consider when analyzing the farmer's market, so small town doesn't always equal small money. And so I think that's something like really getting to know the people who live inside of the area that you're going to be serving will help like key you into that. Something also to look at is who are the other vendors. So at my market that I work at or that I go to, they have more like local artisans and like craft products. So my friend does woodworking, for example. So people know when they come to this market that there's going to be a variety of price points for items and that the price points tend to skew higher. Meaning that people know like ahead of time that they're going to pay like a decent price for my baked goods. So for example, in my market, I'm able to sell my pies for $29. And you may say like for your area that may be low, or for your area that might be a little bit high. But people, at first I was really nervous about charging what I was like, this is really what it's going to cost me and what is worth my time. But what I learned is that people didn't bat an eye and they were like, yeah, okay, I'll pay $29 for your pie. And then they sold out in 30 minutes. So kind of being aware of the other vendors because they help kind of set the stage of what people expect, right? So if it's a market where everything is cheaply priced or it's priced under market value, chances are you're probably going to have a hard time selling your product there, especially if there's other folks in your category who are maybe underpricing you significantly. Some markets do allow vendors in the same category, so I always think that it's a good idea if it's not a new market to actually go to one and see like who is there, like who is your customer going to be? Is it families? Is it folks who are of the millennial kind of generation? Young, Gen Z kind of folks? Is it a market where there's maybe, some elderly folks who like to go? Knowing who is your target customer is so important when you're scoping out a market and who is attending. When you're scoping out a market, also looking at who are those other vendors? So are there vendors doing similar things to you? If yes, like what is going to set you apart? So you're going to want to be able to speak to why somebody should come to your booth versus another booth who's doing something similar. Be aware some markets will allow more like many vendors in the same category. So you have to ask yourself the question of, is it worth your time and energy to sell at that market, or would you be better off investing in another route like hosting your own pop-up at your place or doing a subscription box model? Not saying that you can't be successful if there are other vendors, but you really have to be confident that like your product is going to set you apart, or like how you stage and sell your product. You also want to look at like, do the other vendors have a following. So, for example, at my market this month, there was a new vendor who decided that she wanted to sell sweet treats. And I am kind of the person who says, like, the more the merrier. But I do think that, like, there was some underestimation of, like, oh, like, if I price my products at this point, people will leave my booth, right, to go to this new booth. Well, that's not true, right? Because I've built brand loyalty with my customer base. And I also do a lot of marketing on my Facebook page specific to the market that gets people excited about the products that I'm going to be bringing. So just because there was another vendor doesn't mean that I necessarily lost a ton of money or that those people all of a sudden jump ship. So just something to consider. If there are other vendors there, just thinking about, like, how long have they been vendors? Do they have a loyal client base? Not saying that you can't also carve a piece of the pie for yourself. You can, but like I said, just trying to make that decision of, is your time and energy better spent, like, investing in another route, like a home pop-up or like a subscription box, because those things can also be super popular. And a lot of the times market vendors don't go that route and they don't do those things. Any questions so far? I want to make sure that I'm answering questions as they come in. Okay, I'm scrolling here. Let's see. Jane asks, how do you know how many cookies to make? Excellent question. So when I did my first ever market, I decided that I was going to make a dozen treats per hour of the market. I figured, that's maybe like 6 people stopping by my booth every hour, buying a couple things. Because I had no idea. It was a brand new market, so even the market manager had no idea what the turnout was going to be. I sold out in an hour and a half. So the next market, I kind of knew, okay, so I sold out in an hour and a half. What do I need to make more of in order to space that out, so that way I'm not selling out before the end of the market? Because my goal is, and selling out is a good thing, so kind of going back to, like, that fear of missing out. So for some things, like my pies, I make a limited number. I tell people ahead of time, like, I'm going to have 5 pies at this market. You better get there quick because they're going to sell quick. And they do. So people will purposely get to the market first thing when it opens so they can snag a pie. But at the same time, I also don't like my table looking super empty. And knowing, like, so after that first market, I was able to kind of say, okay, here's where I am. Like, here's how much product people are buying. Let me space this out some more. And then from there, you can kind of set it by sales goals, right? So I want to make $500 at this market. What do I need to bake in order to make $500? So I think of it that way when trying to consider how much stuff to bring. I also think that it's been super helpful for me to get out of, so when I first started, I was very focused on, like, 1 or 2 or, like, small items, right? So people, like, single items, maybe like a pair of items. But what I found is, like, how do you bring in higher priced items? Because people will want to purchase them. So for me, I have pies on my menu, so that's why I bring in the higher, that's a higher monetary value item that I can bring in that I know is going to bring me like a good chunk of cash. So, 5 pies, that's already $150 right there. But also, so looking at ways that you can kind of up your ante. So looking beyond just selling singles. So maybe you're selling a set. Or maybe, if you do DIY kits, maybe you're going to bring in the DIY kits, and that's going to be your high-priced item. I did kind of a pricing test or experiment where I did my menu in reverse order after reading a book on pricing, and I actually found that people bought the higher priced items first before my lower priced items when I did it that way. So on my menu, I had my highest price, my pies, followed by my DIY kits, and then from there, so like in descending order. And so the research kind of says that when people see that, and Corey and Heather have talked about this on the podcast a lot, right? Price anchoring. So that first price that people are seeing, that that $30 for my pie, is anchoring in their mind of like, okay, this is what I can expect to spend at this booth. And then from there, if somebody grabs a pie, usually then they'll also grab 1 or 2 other treats because they're like, well, maybe I want something to tide me over until I can eat this pie, right? And so then all of a sudden the average purchase from somebody is much higher than if they were to just come by my booth and buy 1 or 2 items. So kind of thinking of like this synergy of like, yes, have those single items because people are probably going to consume them right there in the market. But also how can you give them some of these items that they're going to want to take home later but are of a higher dollar value. So that's kind of how I plan on what I bring. I also I think of every market as a test. So sometimes things sell really well and sometimes they don't. And it's kind of just seeing what happens and then incorporating what I've learned into the next market. So, and I think that we, are doing that here, like by being in this group, right? Like we try out these new marketing things, it's work, right? So we try something, maybe it doesn't quite work with our audience, but then we see other people's ideas and we kind of tweak it, and then it's just right. But it's an ever like learning kind of process. So that's kind of how I do the know how much to make. So now I know that like $500 is my benchmark. So on a slow week, I can expect to make at least $500. On a busy week, I can make up to $800. Some of that is also limited by the amount of things that I have time to make. Since I'm a cottage food baker, I bake out of my home, and I just don't have a lot of storage space. I have a freezer, so I have considered freezing cookies, but cookies aren't the biggest part of what I do. I find that markets, especially like looking at the time of day, so if your market's going to start in the morning, make sure to have breakfast items. Like they sell like hotcakes. I tried to get away from doing cinnamon rolls, and my customers literally came up to me and they're like, where are your cinnamon rolls? You're bringing them next time. And it was like not a question. It was like, you're bringing them in July. So I brought back my cinnamon rolls and they sold out super, super quick. So that's kind of how I look at that. And then also looking at like seasonally, like what's going on with the seasons, kind of catering to that piece. But I feel like we already do that so well as cookiers and as bakers. I actually don't have, so April asked, how did I build interest in subscriptions? I actually don't have a subscription. I did at one point when I first started, but I only had like a couple of people and it kind of petered out. But like Laurel said, there was just a live about it that was so good. So I highly recommend watching that if you want to get into the world of subscriptions. Looking here. So analyzing a farmer's market. Look at their customer base. So is this market established? Or is it brand new? And newness is not a bad thing. It can be a great way to get your foot in the door. So that's how I started with the market that I sell at. It was brand new. They didn't have any vendors. So my friend got me connected, and I was the only baker who signed up for the market. So I have kind of become a preferred vendor. I've, built up that client base, built trust with people. So it is a really good opportunity. What I will say about that is looking at the market of like, do they have a strong marketing plan? So if they are just like posting once on Facebook and there's only like 10 people interested in going, chances are like you're not going to have a lot of customers. So looking at the health of the market itself, are they bringing in the people to help their vendors make money? I also think that's a super, it's a bi-directional thing. So, talking about marketing in a farmer's market, you also want to be promoting the market. Tag their Facebook in your posts. Make a case for why people should come out. So I like doing like a post market where, this last week I posted a picture of my daughter eating a sugar cookie. And said like, we had a great time as a family, stay tuned for the August market on this date and join us, letting people know that you had a good time as a vendor, and kind of really buying into that hype of why they should come out. If the market does do a good job of marketing, check out their social media to see how they feature their vendors. I've gotten really, really lucky that the market manager for this market does an exceptional job of working with local businesses to get different sponsorships. He also does a ton of stuff on social media. Whenever I have like new products, or I did a collaboration with one of the other vendors, he did like a whole video on the Pop-Tart that I made using the jam from one of the local ladies. So that makes a huge difference. If you know that the market is super established and people already know about it, they have good foot traffic, that's excellent. But having them have like a really strong social media presence in their own marketing plan is also really helpful, and that can help you kind of decide like, is the health of this market good enough to sustain success for me if I attend. Let's see, other things about marketing. So one of the greatest tactics that I've used is the fear of missing out. So like I said, I'm going to have a limited number of 5 pies. And people know like that I'm serious. I'll have 5 pies. So they know they need to get there early. Same goes with my Pop-Tarts, right? So whenever I develop a new flavor, I'm like, you better get there early to get your Pop-Tart. And people line up to get the Pop-Tarts. So creating like stories too, so like on your social media. So, and I've seen a lot of people do this, and I think it's great, like, posting like your different frosting colors and asking people like, what do you think I'm making today? Or doing like a guess this cookie type of thing. I think that creates like that anticipation for people. And so if you can keep building that up to the market, like, it really helps draw in those people to attend, right? Because the whole thing for marketing for a farmer's market is you actually have to, like, beyond just selling your product, you have to convince people to get dressed and leave their house and come to the market. Which, for people who love going out, maybe that's not too hard of a sell, but for me, I am one of those people where you have to convince me. Like, you have to make it really good for me to leave my house on a Saturday morning for me to be there. So creating that anticipation, looking at like other vendors, like are there opportunities to collaborate with other vendors, right? So since I bake other things besides sugar cookies, I look to, buying jam from, people who specialize in that, because that's not my specialty. Looking at buying honey from the local honey person, or buying eggs from the local egg person, right? And then it's a nice way of like building relationships with other vendors, which is really important. But it's also a way of like nodding to them, and then they nod back to you, right? Like, go try so-and-so's eggs. I made, my bars with their eggs, and they love them. Then the customer's more willing to go over to their station. But if the vendor knows that I'm baking with their products, they're also more likely to send people my way, right? So if somebody stops by the jam lady and says, oh, I just love your strawberry rhubarb jam, she's going to say, well, actually, Natalie's selling Pop-Tarts right next door made out of my jam. You should go check them out, right? So building those relationships can be very helpful, especially like for that collaboration. Things to consider. Oh, I have another question here before I keep going. Do markets usually want a vendor to sign up at the very beginning of the season? I would say yes. What Krista said. It depends on the market. So some people are booked from the get-go. Some markets actually have openings, or sometimes they'll have vendors that can't commit to every week, and so then they're out like a baker for a week or something, or out for a couple of weeks, just like Krista had said. So I would definitely reach out to the market themselves and just say that you're interested in becoming a vendor, and they'll let you know. They'll say, hey, that's a great idea. And even if there's another baker, they'll let you know if they feel like there's opportunity or room for you to be there. I would also say just be careful with that, or be aware that some markets will allow oversaturation of vendors. So, like I said, there's a market, the big market where I live has 7 different bakers. 2 of those exclusively do bread. And to me, like, that's a lot of bread for one market. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But some markets will not turn people away. They just want the more vendors, the better. Maybe they're short on vendors, so they're like, well, it'll make it look better if we have more people there to fill space. But then it goes back to that question of like, is this going to be the best thing for you and your business, right? Because you can attend a market where there's a lot of the same different types of vendors, but then you have to be really confident that people are going to stop by your booth. So things that you can do to set yourself apart, I would say signage. So get height in your displays if you can. Like, yes, you can like set everything flat on the table, but visually it's just not very appealing. So if you can get like shelves of some sort, or baskets, things that will kind of draw people's eyes up. There's also signage. Like when you get signage, people tend to do like, you can do like the banner in the front like you would do at like a vendor show inside. But I highly recommend, if you're going to be at a farmer's market outside with the tent, I just got a new banner made at Costco for like $50. And it's huge. I hang it in the back. And I've had so many people like I see people like snapping pictures because it's got my contact information and everything up there. There's also, I would say, like, make sure that you have your business cards, and if you can, like menu or price things are really helpful. I found that the menu goes over better than the individual prices. But I think that you could probably use both in some way. The chalkboards or like the large tent chalkboards are really nice. I have a tabletop one that I've used. I've kind of outgrown it though because my table is getting really full. Yeah, but getting height in your display is really important. When we're talking about merchandising, reading some articles, they suggest like grouping things in like patterns of 3 or in pyramids, and you'll see that a lot, like triangles when you go into different stores. They'll try to kind of set up their products in that format. I do think that it's really helpful to have a table that is full, but I think that also there's some good like tips of the trade that say that like simple, clean, not cluttered is kind of the best thing. So also thinking about like the spacing between your items. So if your table is getting really, really cramped, my suggestion is like think about how you can incorporate some more tables, which I know is kind of like, yikes, I have to like bring and set up another table. Yes, but there are some like fun configurations that you can do. At the next market that I am in August, I'm actually going to try this out just because we're going to have some fresh produce to sell along with my baked goods. So we're going to try like a U almost, so people have to come into our tent. And what I've heard from vendors who set up their tents that way is that people are actually more likely to buy because they feel like once I go in, then I'm obliged to buy. Not that I want people to like to feel guilty to buy my baked goods, but hey, like every little bit counts, right? So, if your table is starting to get really, really busy, try that. Something else that I found was interesting when talking about like what to bring is sometimes too many choices can actually cause like people to almost like panic and not buy anything. So thinking about like, and I think Heather and Corey talked about this on the podcast too, like having a decent amount of choices is a good thing, but like also too many choices can lead to a lost sale. So I think that's part of like keeping your table looking nice and clean, like, and simple can really be helpful. I don't remember where I read this, but they talked about how actually having fewer items on your table, people have found that they actually sell more, so they make more money. So what I do at my market is I have this really cool like step display that my friend made for me, and I set out my product like evenly spaced on this nice thing on the nice stand, and then whenever somebody buys one or two, then I kind of restock. And then if like my things are dwindling, then I'll actually like in a lull, I'll go out and I'll kind of reshift my table. So maybe I'll take my baskets away and put things on the stand instead. Or if I have like, an empty spot here, maybe I'll fill in and make like a little pyramid with another product there. But I try to keep it like simple but visually appealing. And I find that, you don't want people to think that they don't have choices. So making sure you still have, the product that you intended to bring. But keeping it simple for people, I think, is really helpful. And I found that I make more money when I do it that way as opposed to setting everything out on the table. My husband did a market for me once, and he set kind of a lot of stuff out on the table, but he still did good. I mean, he had maybe like 4 cookies left over. That's not a big deal. But the pictures weren't as nice of my table. Any questions? I love questions. I tried to address Corey's question of does the market do marketing for you? And I would say that's a big thing to look for if you're wanting to get into the farmers market game is do they do marketing? Otherwise, like I said, it's hard to convince people to put on real clothes on a Saturday and drag their butts out of bed to come to a market. I'm like looking at my notes here to see if there's anything else. Oh, yes. So another thing to really consider is the vendor rules. So make sure you know everything about like reserving dates, spaces. Are you going to be penalized if you don't get to every date of the market? Like, is that an expectation? Are you allowed to skip X number? Are they going to close if there's rain, for example, or is it a rain and shine market? I mean, those things all make a big difference, especially when with our product, since our product is, of course, like perishable. The nice thing is that you can freeze cookies, but if you sell other stuff, it's harder to sell to freeze other stuff too. Space. So most of the time, it's a 10 by 10 tent space. There's a lot of things that you're going to want to bring. So some markets may provide some things like access to electricity, things like that. So you're going to want to know that stuff, but you're going to want to bring, like, you usually have to bring your own tables, your own chairs, all of the stuff that's going to be displaying on your table. A lot of people like tents or booths that are decorated, so that's even, I think, another cause to maybe think about adding more tables, because then you can also add in some decorations. I got this really cool vintage bakery sign that I prop up outside of my tent, and that draws people in. I try to keep it branded, so using tablecloths that match my color scheme, using like my baskets, for example, are of the same kind of feel. Like, I want everything to look like that. Yes, some markets will rent tents and tables. My market is not one of them, and they require us to bring our own. That's definitely something that you want to know about or look up in their vendor handbook or their vendor rules before you commit. Thankfully, my husband comes with me to the markets, and so he jokes and tells people that he's the dishwasher, the taste tester, and my roadie. And it's very true. So just something to consider. But some markets do rent out the things for you, yes. Especially if they're indoors. I find that the indoor event places oftentimes will have all of that set up, which is really nice. Amy asks, do you find that packaging at markets is just as important as a custom order that you send out of your home? I would say yes. I have been finding ways to kind of try to up my packaging. The tough part is, so with the farmers markets, like remembering, what am I trying to say? Remembering the heat, like, or your elements, right? So, I have some of these, like, I try to use my sugar cookie bags for another product, for example, and what it ended up doing is like melting the icing on top of my Pop-Tart. So now I have completely switched to paper bags. And it's amazing. Like the Pop-Tart looks so much more professional and appetizing. I mean, I think that visually it's important for people, especially if you get into a situation where there's multiple vendors, right? Like you're looking to set yourself apart, and I think that's one way to do it. But yes, so remembering the elements in the packaging piece too. So this most recent market, for example, I have these like baking pans like that you can do like cobblers in, right? And they have like these lids that supposedly fit on them. And during my transportation to the market, one exploded everywhere, right? And all I'm seeing is like dollar signs down the drain. It was very sad. But thinking of it from that perspective too, of like, how am I going to get my product to the market in one piece? So my husband and I have already been like brainstorming. We're like, we're going to have to buy like sturdy like BRP boxes to put these tins in, so I can bake in the tin, but I'm not bringing the tin itself to the parking or to the event because it just won't hold up. So keeping that in mind with your packaging, so making sure that it's gonna meet what you need, but also in the elements. I would say for like my pies, I always buy the boxes with the windows, even though they're more expensive, because people want to look at them. Like they see that, brown crust, and people are very visual. Like they want to see what's inside. I know some people will just do the usual and will like kind of open one, but I also don't like my stuff being open to the elements. Like I prefer everything be packaged ahead of time. So there's like, especially since I got started during COVID, I was like, we're just not gonna like chance people like walking around breathing on stuff. So keeping that in mind. But yeah, for your higher priced items, especially if you're gonna sell sets of cookies, or like a sugar cookie kit, like you're gonna want that to really pop, so that way people are more enticed, to purchase those higher priced items, and of course then add on a couple of your lower price too to bump up your average sale price. I also love how you guys are helping out in the chat, helping each other out. Also think about how to get your items to your booth location. Yes, absolutely. Some places do have you park. Thankfully mine allows us to drive up, unload, and then we can pull our car to the parking spot. It's also good to know that most markets will have you get there 2 hours early, or will allow you to get there 2 hours early for setup. Most people start loitering in early. Some markets are very specific about no early sales, but people will still get there early just to kind of like scope things out. So that is also something to consider, is like you want to make sure that you can commit to being there early enough to set up all of your stuff, and you're going to want to be ready at least 15-20 minutes prior to the start of the market. Otherwise, like people, when they're peeking, like, ooh, what's going on there? What's going on there? Right? They're not going to get that full effect of like what your table looks like. It also saves you a lot of like anxiety to get there early. I say this from experience. So we bring our daughter to the market because it's a family-friendly market. It's in a park. That's one of the reasons why we do it. So like a traditional farmer's market, the big one here in town, just doesn't work for us because it's in an urban setting. I would have to worry about her running into the street or maybe getting like kidnapped. So we go to the small town farmers market, and it's family friendly, so they allow us to bring her. Some markets do not allow that, so check into that. honestly, I probably couldn't do the market if I wasn't allowed to bring her with. But then it's also something like to consider too, is like that setup time. Yeah, so if you have to park and then move to your spot, those foldable wagons are awesome. Those are awesome for hauling things. Otherwise, like, try to get help to help you schlep things, or try to like get boxes. I usually use Costco boxes because that's where I do a lot of shopping. So those big boxes tend to work really well to do things. I also have found that bags are really important. I try to keep on brand with my bags. So thinking back to like the packaging, I splurge for the craft bags instead of like the plastic ones because it fits my brand. Like I'm more rustic. So like all of my boxes that I have are craft paper boxes, and so the craft paper bags just like really, it kind of ties it all in together. And I also feel like they're like a higher quality. And so I do offer those to people, especially if they buy those bigger items, because they're gonna want to carry it around. So thinking about it from like that point of view of your customer as well, of like, what is their experience going to be from the time they step up to your booth to the time they leave your booth. Payments. So I have a Square. It works really, really well. You can actually program it with like the products that you're going to have there. Honestly, I keep a running tally in my head and do it that way, and just like type in, the total amount. But make sure you have lots of cash. People love to pay with cash at farmers markets. Make sure you have lots of ones. Our fiasco in June was my husband thought he had the money. I thought I had the money. Neither one of us had the money. Or I thought he had the money, and we didn't have any ones. So thankfully we had, our friends were kind enough to give us 10 ones, and then we were able to make it to the end of the market. But yeah, I would say at least $100 to $200 in change is really helpful. And that kind of gets us through the market season. So we don't deposit the cash after every market. We kind of just leave it in our little pouch. And that works for us. That I think that's a personal preference kind of thing. But one of the things that I have been really thinking about is making sure, or adding in an email subscription option. So having some way for people to subscribe to that's good to know. You can set up, or I've seen people at their vendor booths have a way for people to sign up for announcements or different things through the email subscription. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping that I'm going to start building here, is building my email list. Since Facebook, as we all know, Heather got thrown into jail. Facebook could throw us into jail, and then all of a sudden my customers wouldn't have a way to reach me. I do have a website and a phone number, but I still think it'd be nice to have that email service, and it would make it seem more exclusive so people could get a sneak peek. Amy says, I do craft shows. My following is not as large. I have trouble selling things left over. Lowering prices towards the end of the show to sell the product. You can. I feel like there's differing opinions. If you don't have a huge following and you know that you're not going to be able to sell the product once you leave the space, I would say towards the end of the market, you could definitely lower your prices. I wouldn't lower them too much though. I would think about it from the price anchoring kind of standpoint. So you have your price written there, maybe like if you write a line through it and then in a bigger thing, right? Like maybe you like decrease it by like 50 cents or $1. It'll make people feel like they're getting a deal, but you're still not like decreasing it so much that you're losing money. I think that's the biggest thing that I would recommend is like what's your break even point, or what's your like I'm losing money at this point. If you're looking to break even, maybe, the other thing that I was seeing people do is taking their products and using them for marketing. So like taking, whatever they have left and going to like a local business, but being really intentional about it, right? And using that to generate future sales. So that could also be a possibility instead of lowering your prices. Of course, then you're not really making the money back, but then you could write it off as a marketing cost. Just a thought. And I am by no means an expert, so I'm just talking through it with you guys. Did not know that you can set up your Square to register cash sales. That's awesome. Any other questions? I hope that this was helpful, and that you guys have learned something new, even those of you who have sold at farmers markets before. This has been awesome. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, going once, going twice, I'll keep up with the video. So if you're watching this after the fact, if you're watching the recording, and you have questions, just drop them in the comments, and I'm going to be sure to follow kind of what's going on and answer things after the fact. And also, if you like want to send me a message, you can always do that too. Friend requests me, I don't care, It's a small world. I love bakers. I'm getting off on a tangent, but I'm going to get off on a tangent. I have found that, like, in our community at least, our little group of bakers is so tight-knit. And that's another thing that I recommend, especially if you're getting into the markets and there's other bakers involved. And not everybody plays nice in the sandbox, but most of us do, I would say. And I think that's something really cool about this community especially, is that we support each other and try to help each other out and help each other succeed. So if you ever want, to pick my brain a little bit more, have a question that you didn't want to share in the chat, you can always just shoot me a message too. So, thanks everybody. I hope you have a good evening.